This is the Business Stuff Podcast. This is where I will share the lessons I've learned from advising thousands of businesses over almost 30 years. Each episode will give you practical insight to allow you to learn from other people's mistakes. I'll be pulling in experts from our team and the world of business, and together we'll make sure your business is giving you what you want. My name is Martin, and this is the Business Stuff Podcast. So hi, it's Martin from the Accelerator team, and I'm here today with Raman Sehgal, who is the author of Floundering Founder, amongst other things. Hi Raman, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm fine, Martin. Nice to see you. Nice to speak to you.
Yeah, and good to have you on. Thank you very much for coming on, sir. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about what you do for anyone who doesn't know who you are?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Raman. I wear a few different hats, but I suppose fundamentally I'm a founder of a business called Ramarketing. So we are a international marketing agency that specialises in the pharmaceutical and biotech space. So we're headquartered in Newcastle, but we have offices in the US, in Boston as well. So we're about 75 people across the two continents. We're one of the fastest growing agencies in the country and in the Northeast, actually. And in addition to that, I am also the co-founder of a business called Lead Candidate, which is a talent acquisition business in exactly the same space. And as you mentioned before, I'm an author of a book called The Floundering Founder, which I'm proud to say is an Amazon bestseller both in the US and the UK, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely, pretty cool indeed. So first of all, people might be wondering how you managed to get into the sector you're in. Can you tell us some more about how you ended up? Because we've got an audience who range from people who've got no employees up to hundreds of employees. You're 75, which for most local businesses, most people would agree is a decent size. You've got an international reach in a sector that a lot of people would say, well, how the hell do you market in the pharma industry? Well, how did you get into this?
Yeah, a bit of luck actually, I suppose. And my first ever job is after I finished university was working for a marketing agency in Newcastle, and my first ever client was a pharmaceutical contract manufacturing company in Northumberland. And so I didn't come from a science background, I came from a marketing background, but it was just a right fit. The owner of that business, some of your listeners will know, is a lady called Fiona Cruikshank, who's very well known in the kind of Northeast business community. So Fee and I hit it off personally, and she had very ambitious plans for her. She had two pharmaceutical manufacturing companies at the time, and so I was a enthusiastic young marketing person trying to make an impression, and she was the right client, and we kind of hit it off very well. And that sent me down a path of really getting into this space and into the clinical trials world and what we call the contract services space, which is basically the supply chain ecosystem that sits behind or underneath the pharmaceutical and biotech sector. And I can kind of explain in kind of layman's terms in a moment what that means. And for me, it ultimately led down the track of starting remarketing, and because I had this core of clients or contacts in this space. And for many years, actually, Ramarketing was a generalist marketing agency, but we had these kind of life science, pharmaceutical related clients. And so in 2015, I pivoted the business into, I can talk through how I ended up coming to that decision, but that was really a key decision that we made that led to opening up the doors from a global export perspective, but also just the value of really niching down as well. And just to kind of, as I mentioned before, kind of bring to life where in the pharmaceutical industry we play, because it's quite specific. We're not out promoting drug products in paracetamol or anything like that. So if you think about the listener, assuming you've had a COVID vaccine, there's a high chance that our clients have been involved in the development, manufacturing, distribution, packaging, testing of that vaccine. And that goes for many kind of new novel drug products. So our clients are typically high-tech B2B specialist companies, that work in the supply chain to support new drugs being developed and existing drugs that are on the market. So very, very niche in the grand scheme of things.
So pharma's a huge industry, as everyone knows, and you're very niche within that, which is interesting. But if I can just rewind then, Raman, so obviously you had a marketing background, you'd done marketing at university. Were you worried at all about the fact you didn't know anything about pharma? Or did you just think, well, I know how to market, I'll find a way to market?
Yeah, that's exactly the way. I mean, I never needed to necessarily learn the depth of the science, because that's not really what the role is about. You need to have an understanding of the basics and commercial knowledge of how the mechanics of it all work. But for me, I suppose it was looked at, it was at a stage in my career where, you're fresh out of university, you soak things up like a sponge. And so I was able to and I found it interesting. That was the other thing. Like I didn't know anything about clinical trials and how drugs were developed and how we get them from A to B and how they end up getting approved and how many fail and how many succeed and the impact it has on people's lives. And so that was probably the piece of luck around just the stage of life I was at. And to your point there is what ended up happening was actually just applying some of the knowledge that I had was effective. So in those days, this is going back to 2005, 2006 time. There wasn't in that space. Everyone was still doing events in traditional paper-based advertising, whereas I came in with why don't we think about the website and what our SEO and what our digital presence looks like, and it ended up being very effective because no one else was even thinking about things back then. So ultimately, no one really cared whether I knew the in-depth detail or not, because the results were speaking for themselves, and that was the foundation in which we ultimately built the business.
And you mentioned Fiona there, who I don't know, but it sounds like you met someone who was also happy to take a chance that you knew marketing. They knew what they were doing in that industry, and I presume all you had to do was persuade her that she should give this a go.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think Fee and I have a very close relationship. I'd say she was my first ever client. I ended up going to work for her business, so she ended up becoming my boss, and then when I started Ramarketing, she ended up being my mentor, and then she ultimately invested in the business in 2017, and then actually exited the business when we did a private equity investment last year. So, and genuinely is now one of my closest friends in the world, and so it's been amazing to go on that journey with someone who I look up to so much, but that is always there to guide. And I think for many of us, having people either within your organization or beyond your organization that have got an eye out for you and your career and where it's going is critical. And you look back now, you don't realize it at the time, but it's incredibly shaping, and it helps you make difficult decisions or decisions that I remember leaving my first day. I actually left. She was a client at the time, and I remember ringing her because I was already quite close to this. Is 15 years ago, saying like I'm thinking about leaving this agency, and having her as just someone I'd listen and support. So yeah, our journeys have been intertwined for many years, and I'm very grateful for that.
Right, okay. Raman, you've mentioned luck a couple of times. Do you believe in luck? Might be a strange question, but do you...
It's a good question. There is a chapter in my book, and it is, I think the name of the chapter is you can't make your own luck, or and what I often thought, and I still do talk about luck, but what I've worked out in hindsight is you do make your own luck. And what I mean by that is you put yourself in the right places at the right times, and you just take the chances. So for me, sometimes you get it wrong and sometimes you get it right. And what I often refer to as luck as just me rolling the dice or just being at the right place at the right time. So, I can't tell you the amount of times that connections have happened and business opportunities have come up in life because I've been at an event or I've had a conversation do you know, actually, if you look at us having a conversation today, this is the consequence of me knowing one of your colleagues who we randomly met because she worked for an agency in Newcastle many years ago. You know, we always got on quite well. I'd not seen her for years. We bumped into each other at an event. And actually from this conversation, I might end up meeting. And this is just one tiny example of that. And you just never know where these opportunities lead to. And so for me, I do think, particularly as an entrepreneur, someone that, you know, that's scaled a business, is just putting yourself in those situations and having those conversations. And I think, you know, talk about one story. I remember I moved to the US a few years ago, and on one of the events that I went to, I met this guy, and we kind of were like, I feel like we've met before. And I remember before I went to that event and that night, I was thinking, oh God, I can't be bothered to go to this event. I'm knackered, you know, or whatever. Actually, it was before I moved. It was a trade mission. And I met this guy, and I remember leaving I went to the event, which was half of it. I was like, I couldn't be bothered, and I wanted to go home and just get a beer at the bar and just have an early night. But I ended up going to this event, and I met this guy, Michael, and we just got on quite well. And, you know, added him on LinkedIn, didn't think anything of it. And then when I ended up moving to Boston a few years later, I was back at the same venue, and we bumped into each other again, and we were like, we feel like we've met before. The conversation went on, and my wife's a doctor, and because we moved to the US, she didn't have a job there. And I was telling my wife can't work as a doctor in the US. And it turned out his wife was a doctor, a European doctor that worked for a biotechnology company in Cambridge, in the area that we were living. And long story short, it led to his wife connecting with my wife, and my wife ended up getting a job with this person. But if you wind it all back, that opportunity for my wife, which ultimately led to her having a job in Boston, was the consequence of being in the right place at the right time. And just where most people will be like, I can't be bothered to go, I'm not going. And on that occasion where I decided, right, I am going to go, come on, I'm over here. We've spent all this money to come on this trade mission. Like, I'm not going to have an early night. I actually went to the event, and yeah, it's just a good example of how things can work out. And I'm sure you've got loads in your own experience.
Yeah, no, I always think it's funny how the people who work the hardest are also the luckiest. It's almost as if it isn't luck, and it's actually just being in the right place. But if you weren't there, it would never be the right place. Definitely the wrong place was back in your hotel room, sitting watching TV on your own with a bottle in your hand. That was never the right place. Yeah. So
as tempting as that sounds, yeah.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? You know, but you also mentioned there the fact that you have to be prepared to take opportunities as well. Because I think I personally think a lot of people are presented with opportunities and they're just afraid to take them. And it doesn't have to be a big grand thing. It can be something small and easy. And I think if you're not in the habit of taking those opportunities when they are presented, it doesn't matter. You'll never be lucky, because you have to be prepared to take the chance, don't you?
Yeah, and it's a great point. You know, I mean, one of the things I've seen in my career, particularly in the last 10 years, is I meet people who are older than me who regret things that they didn't take the chances. So often the one I use which was one of the reasons we moved to the US, was there was so many people in my close friends and network would say, I had the chance to move to Dubai, or I had the chance to live in India, or I had the chance to go and take the kids to live in the US, and I wish we'd taken it. And honestly, before we made that was a huge contributing factor to us actually deciding to go and move to the US, because I was like, I'm going to regret this if we don't do it. I could see me becoming one of those people. Not that those people have their lives and careers have worked out just fine, but there was always a niggle, that I wish we should have taken a chance. So you're absolutely spot on there, Martin.
But so there's a couple of opportunities there, a couple of times when you've clearly taken those steps. And the first one was going alone. So you had a good relationship with someone, it was working well, you were in an agency that, yet you haven't said that you disliked the agency, but you felt like you needed to go alone. What was behind that then, Raman? Why did you wake up one day and just go, I need to be doing this for myself?
I mean, it wasn't that straightforward, I suspect. If I look back, I started the company almost as a side gig. So if I rewind back to what I mentioned before of Fiona had these two companies, and when one of them was sold, I went to work for the other one. And the business that was sold, the managing director there, a lady called Sharon, said to me, "Hey, do you want to do our PR in your, like, on the side, basically?" And I got the okay that I was able to do that. And the strategy behind that was, okay, I can earn an extra 10, 15 grand a year more, and we can go traveling. We can go traveling around the world. And this was 15 years ago. It was a huge amount of money to what I was earning in my main job. And so that was the amount of strategy that went into it. And then for 2 years, I had a full-time job and I had a client. And then I went down to 4 days and I had a couple of clients, and 3 days and even more clients. And then where I was lucky, going back to that word again, was Diane Sharp, who was the managing director at the business I was employed by. I remember we met in Edinburgh. I was living in Edinburgh at the time. She's like, you need to leave your job. And I was like, oh my God, I'm getting fired. I thought I was about to get sacked. And she was like, go and do.
You thought you were getting sacked, but she was giving you advice.
What she was doing was actually even better than that. She was saying, take your salary and that we will be your client. Because effectively I was doing the same job in-house as I would be on if it was my own company. And it was just having someone who could see where the opportunity lay for my business, but also that willing to give me a shot. And she knew that I wouldn't let her down. And so, that was in 2011. So it was almost 2 years of a part-time gig, side gig. And then that felt like a big jump moment. It always does, because you've got no safety net. I mean, the safety net I had is I had a 1 year contract with, so my salary effectively was converted into a 1 year contract. And that was enough for me to feel like, right, that's enough of a safety net, and I can pick up some more clients or grow some existing clients. And that's kind of, it seems, honestly, it's 10, 11 years ago now, and it just seems like a different world away as well. COVID's added like a decade in there as well, I'm sure. So.
Yeah, I'm sure, yeah. Well, a cynical person, you see, would have been given that opportunity and thought, they're just trying to get rid of me here. This is because they don't want to pay me redundancy or something. Instead of seeing it as an opportunity, they would read into that, well, why are they doing that? So, yeah.
Maybe that's what you were saying. Maybe she just wanted me off the books, Martin, and I just she wanted it was easier to, go. Never mind. Now it's all coming out.
But yeah, it all worked out, didn't it? So, man, you did that. At what point did you realise you needed to build a team? Then you mentioned you got 75 people working for, one side of your businesses. One of the biggest obstacles people have in business is starting. The second one is getting help. How did you get over that hurdle then? What made you realise that you had to have more people if you wanted to grow?
So the early days were, it's a very well trodden path in the last 5 years in multiple industries, but what I could see back then was an opportunity to use contractors and freelancers. So what I did in the first few years, maybe for the first 3 or 4 years, is I actually built up a really solid, almost consulting model, and where I brought people with specific expertise. So, for example, if we'd won a retail client, I knew the team member that was brilliant at PR and retail. Or if we won a design client, we had a designer. And then in 2013 and 14, that was when I started employing people. It was a massive decision. I remember it. It's funny, I just met 7 of our new team on a call, and just they've joined in the last 2 weeks. And I'm like, it's crazy the growth that we're experiencing now and how different it feels, where people just start and it just feels normal. Whereas in those days, employing 1 or 2 people felt like such a responsibility. It felt like, God, I hope I don't get this wrong. But I suppose what I had in the early days in particular was a very solid business model whereby we knew how much revenue we had was coming in on the whole. We could always grow it. I knew that, we could pay the employees, 1 or 2 employees, and that the contractors are almost, they ate what we caught, so to speak. So there was no overhead in the truest sense. So what that allowed us to do, Martin, is grow the business in a very sustainable, cash positive way. So we were building up
low risk as well, because the photographer only shoots a photo if there's a job for the photographer.
That's right, yeah. But the one difference, I think, where I did get something right in the journey was I treated them as employees, and I don't mean that from a literal perspective. I mean, Like I didn't treat
you haven't got workers here who weren't workers yet.
No,
You treat them as team members.
They were in like, you know, I've still got brilliant relationships with all those early freelancers that we use. Like they feel like team people who used to work on the team, not freelancers. And even things like we used to pay their invoices on the same day, for example. Like it was always that way of treating them like you'd want to be treated. So when we had a Christmas party, they would all be invited. When we did company updates, they would all be invited. Obviously, we stopped short of giving them computers and mobile phones and all that kind of stuff. And they always had different gigs going on, but we always tried to guarantee them work. So we'd always say to them, look, you do a minimum of 4 days this month or 8 days this month. And the reason I did that is I had been on that side as well, right? When I first started, that when you know that money's coming in, you're very, that secure income you work for and you're grateful for. And so again, to your point, like it was low risk, but it was done in a way by I knew if I treated them really well, it would keep them keen to come back for more. Then I look back now and there was definitely a point, I think it was around 2015 where the model shifted. I think it was around the time we pivoted the business into life sciences. We knew at that point, actually, it's a confidence thing. By that point, I had a bit more confidence in the growth of the business. We had more money in the bank. So we knew, God, like, so that was definitely a pivot point. Whereas now I think 98% of our work is delivered by employees and 2% is probably contractors. The model has completely shifted in the last 10 years.
Obviously, it would be remiss of us to chat today without talking about the impact that COVID has had. But before, and I mentioned that for a reason, which I'll probably come back to. But before we get there, you also mentioned you've got people in, the UK and the US. So was it as big a hurdle employing someone within another country, or did you just say there's a natural evolution? You had work there, you needed people there to do it. Was it as simple as that?
It was because I was living there. So, I was living in the US in the middle of COVID. And so we'd already employed several people by the time COVID hit. I think that the thing that we found more difficult, like everyone else, was our office team pivoting to virtual working. Our US team were all pretty comfortable with virtual working because a lot of us were, we've got teammates in Florida, in Philadelphia, in North Carolina, in Pittsburgh, like across the East Coast. And so I think it was for the team in Newcastle was probably the most difficult because they went from having this very social, vibrant Newcastle and our Manchester team. Actually, we had two offices at the time, and actually being in offices around people, that culture agency vibe is so important, and trying to then translate that into a virtual world. And we employed, it's funny because our head of people was employed 2 weeks after COVID hit, and she had the unenviable task of working out how we onboard and recruit and everything all online. And we must have done something right because our staff retention rate of remote employees is really high. So whatever we did, we built a bit of a model. So it wasn't too difficult. I suppose it's funny now. You look back and we just had no idea what was going to happen in that March. I remember we had an emergency board meeting, and I remember we sat down and said, right, we're going to do everything we can to keep people in a job. Like that was our main. We didn't use the furlough scheme. We didn't stop investing. We didn't stop growing. And what we didn't see happening, which is what actually happened, was two things. One, the life science space and the pharmaceutical development space experienced a massive upturn, hugely driven by COVID, like finding a vaccine. And we were right in the center of that. And the other thing is because we were a very digitally focused agency and our competitors had often been quite events and traditional focused, obviously all the events stopped. So clients were saying to us, hey, we were going to spend 100 grand on these events. Can we now put it into digital marketing spend? So we experienced about 80% growth. We almost doubled in 2020. And it was great, but it was also incredibly painful. Like,
of course,
push people to their limit, because it wasn't just people dealing with relentless growth. It was actually people dealing with people being at home and on their own. And, we had mental health challenges for team members, and it was important for us to support them all during that as well. And so we felt the pain more in 2021 actually than 2020 of that growth.
Was that because the adrenaline and excitement got you through 21, and then 22 exactly, yeah. You realised that actually this is here to stay, we are just this busy now?
Yeah, not many people were jumping jobs in 2020, right? Because we were growing and we were recruiting, and I know there are other agencies and other businesses I know that furloughed people for months and months, and we didn't use any of this. We actually used the scheme in the US where we were entitled to a certain amount of money, and actually we decided, it was called a forgiveness loan, and we actually paid that back. We took a decision as a business that we paid it back to. We didn't have to, but we felt it was the right thing ethically to pay it back to the US government, because it helped us as a bit of a safety net if we needed it. But actually our business grew, and so I don't know, we might be the only company in America that decided to do that, but we didn't need the money, quite honestly. So we were fortunate. But back to your look, the conversation we had, we were really bullish. Fee in particular was like, she'd been through downturns and challenges, not specific COVID obviously, but this is a time to invest. This is a time to double down. And that's what we did. We continued to recruit. I think we brought 25, 30 people on during that year. And it was defining actually for our business. It really put us on the map.
Raman, you mentioned right at the start of the conversation here that one of the things that you did when you first started working with Fiona was to not focus on the traditional model of your events, exhibitions, that kind of stuff, giving away the gimmicky toys at convention centres, etc. And you went into the digital by the sense of it, your websites, etc. How have you found that competitors have shifted now? Obviously, with events stopping during COVID, they can't just do the normal same old. Are they now catching up, or do you think that they're like 10 years behind, not 2 years behind? What's happening in the market here?
It's a really astute question. I mean, I think a lot of them have had to pivot. They've had to at least say they know what they're talking about. Whether they do is a different.
All of a sudden they're experts and they've always thought it was a good idea. Is that?
Yeah, I suppose in my mind, it's marketing by its very nature is like, it's always moving forward. It's always progressing. It's always evolving in the business to business marketing space. And I suppose as we are, we've been going for 13 years now, we are also building quite a track record of not just the clients we work with, but the data of what works and what doesn't. And so it's very easy to say, hey, we offer X, Y, and Z services. I think it's very different to be able to say, we offer these services and this is what works for companies like you in your exact situation. So I think we're able to I suppose, combine it with that track record, as well as just the capability of doing it. You then overlay the fact that we've got specific expertise in this sector. That's all we do. So, when clients discover us or come across us, there aren't many businesses like ours in the world. And so I think what often gets us not only through the door, what often helps us win business is just the very niche sector knowledge that we bring to the table. It's a really difficult, if we are pitching against a generalist agency, and even if we're twice the price, we're much more appealing, because the client's sitting there thinking, I ain't going to have to explain all this to them a million times. It's going to save me more time than what it's costing.
So how niche would you say you are then, Raman? So if the sector as a whole is 100%, what percentage of pharma can and do you work with? Is it like 0.5% or 10%?
It's really difficult, because it's where you draw the line of where the sector, at a macro factor, we work in the healthcare industry. The next level down, we work in the pharmaceutical or the life sciences bit. And then of that, we're in pharmaceutical and bio. And of that, we're in the supply chain ecosystem. But of that, we don't touch that market alone is like hundreds of billions of dollars globally. So, the way I look at it is we're playing in a market that's probably, the global market cap of a couple of $100 billion globally. So it's still a big market. And you have to remember the global pharmaceutical is a huge, you look at the UK alone.
Yeah.
I was at an event in London last week. It's a massive proportion of the UK's GDP, and that's replicated. It's even greater in the US and in other economies. So
yeah,
I think again, because it's so niche, it's hard to replicate. Like to have this, like we have a real combination in our business of like very smart business to business marketing technical people. We've then got industry specialists that have worked in the sector for years. So our CEO, Emma, is exactly that. So and then we have numerous people in our company that come from effectively like the companies we work with, they come from those companies. And then in addition to that, you've got scientific copywriters who are PhD specialists who bring in kind of that scientific knowledge. And then you've got, I suppose, hybrid people like me, and there are several of us on the team that have come from a marketing background that have worked only in this space. So know who the competitors, know the industry, know the trends. But in order to replicate our team, like to find that talent across the globe is really difficult to do. And so again, from a niche perspective, it's a very defendable place to be. And hence there's not a bunch of competitors all over the world because there aren't that many people in the world that know this space as well as we do. So it's really important for us to just retain that sector knowledge. And so again, that's really important from what you said before about, we're not just a marketing agency, that's why we, that's not what our clients are always using our services for. It's also that sector knowledge. I'll often send the clients in, here's an acquisition, you might want to keep an eye on this company, they're a good acquisition target for you. Or actually, we've heard this equity company is investing in this technology. Like, that's not the normal relationship that a marketing agency has with its customer. So it's a much more, like we look at ourselves like a commercial partner that's like helps with growth. So it's not, even though I call it marketing agency, because that's what people understand. In the sector, we like to think of ourselves as a bit of a growth partner, a bit more holistic than just marketing.
So you mentioned something quite interesting there then, Raman, this idea, and I don't know if this was just an off-the-cuff remark or actual, but you said even if we're twice the price, they know that we know what they're talking about. They know they haven't got to explain things 5 times. And you can't pick that up without being there, can you? You can't accidentally learn how clinical testing works. It's quite hard to just pick that up, isn't it? You need to be in it to learn it. Does that, I don't know if you've read the book. There's a guy, Daniel Priestley, I think it was, wrote Oversubscribed. And it's the idea about, so he talks about one of his opening examples is, personal trainers, that work 60 hours a week at 20 quid an hour. That's the limit. But if you become the personal trainer in just a specified area, you can break all barriers, can't you?
Totally. And it's funny because I've not read that book, but I use the example in my book about, if you've hurt your knee and you go to the doctors and the doctor says, right, you can see this, you can see a GP, it's going to cost you 100 quid, or you can see a knee specialist, it's going to cost you 200 quid. You're probably going to spend 200 quid in like to go and see the knee specialist. And that's a really basic example, but it's effectively the same thing now. Yeah. And also for us, most of our competitors in the US. So we've also got this slightly other different component that the pricing model is different in the US than it is in the UK or in Europe. So we have different pricing mechanisms for the US market because actually it's more expensive to hire there versus the UK and versus Europe. And actually we have clients in Asia as well. So they're on a different pricing model. But again, the fundamental thing that brings them all to us or it makes us an interesting partner is the fact that we are a specialist. Back to your point, that we are a specialist in this space. And yes, they can pay less and use a local company, but it's a bit of a false economy. Most of the work we win is that conversation, especially with with fast growing of private equity backed companies, first private equity companies, it's always, well, we use this local company to do our website, but they don't really know our sector. We have to explain everything to them. They don't very proactive. They don't know our market. They don't know our competitors. They don't know the trends. So that's what we're looking for. In addition to the marketing expertise, we want the other stuff as well. And in my experience, there might be a bit of sticker shock with whatever the pricing is, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not apples for apples. If they then compare us with our competitors, it's all pretty aligned. But if you're comparing us to, I don't know what a Newcastle-based agency charges, but I suspect we'll be a lot more for the same services. And I'm not apologetic about that, because I imagine our average wage is twice the price of an average one here as well. So yeah, it's not, we're not shopping in the same place, or we're not fishing in the same pond.
It's interesting when you said there about people don't know who their clients' competitors are, etc. We obviously know the accountancy market in and around our area. We know, and I follow friends who have their own practices, and quite often I'll text. There's one lad in particular, I seem to be texting him 3 times a week to say, "Do you realise your PR team have retweeted one of our tweets?" And he's like, "Why do they keep doing that?" So it was like demonstrating industry knowledge by retweeting their competitor. And I was like, because we are in competition, we are good pals, but great for us. I was like, "Do you realise you're paid someone to send them to our website?" And he's like, "Oh," and so yeah, it's good. It's exactly what. But listen, Raman, you mentioned private equity as well, and you mentioned earlier that Fiona was a part of the business, and I think you said exited when he took on private equity. Was that like Dragon's Den style then? Was it like a TV moment, or was it less glamorous than that?
It was less glamorous, it's funny because one of my best mates is Sarah Davies, who's one of the Dragons, and Sarah was actually really helpful during the process. So I'd often text her and ring her and tell her where it's funny, we didn't, apart from my wife and Fiona, who were the shareholders, and our FD and our CEO Emma, no one knew about the deal. And Sarah was one of the only other people in the world that knew, like in my circle of friends, because we wanted to keep it so kind of closely knit. But it was fantastic to go through the process. Like I think I learned more during the M&A process than in anything else I've ever done in my life, I have to say. Once you've got a business that's of value, and we knew it was of value because we had multiple companies knocking on our door, bigger agency groups that are trying to buy us and all that kind of stuff, which is very flattering. But actually, what it meant for us was we had to think about, well, where are we taking this business? What does that look like? The market opportunity was there, the business was performing well. But from a personal perspective, for me, it was also a bit of de-risking. I think a lot of entrepreneurs get to a point where for me personally, I've invested 12 years in a row, and you kind of like, it's like being at a poker table and going all in every year effectively. And yes, you're building up reserves, which is great. But it is, I owned, between my wife and I, 91% of the business. So we had a significant majority share. And so for us, it felt like the right time to explore other options. And, we hired an investment banker in London. And again, talking about pricing, I could have hired any investment bank in Newcastle, for example, right? But what we did is we actually specifically found an investment banker that knew the marketing agency space, but also knew the pharmaceutical contract services space. Super, super niche. If you think of a Venn diagram of an investment banker, and they were an international firm, and we paid I'm assuming we paid well over the odds, but the valuation of the business that we were able to get, the positioning, we were back that pricing conversation, we were the customer in that sense, and we got great value on what we spent because we picked the right investment banker.
I was going to say, you said well over the odds. I presume I don't mean to be supposed to correct you, but I presume you mean much more than you could have paid. But it wasn't way over the odds because the value was right. You're
absolutely right, Martin. You're absolutely right. The terminology is incorrect. Like, what we would have paid comparatively to a general investment bank firm, I suspect would have been a significant premium, but it was a premium that was absolute value for money from our perspective, because they knew who our market was, they knew who the acquirer field was, and then ultimately it led us down a path, and we partnered with a company called North Edge Capital, who are actually headquartered in Manchester, and have a presence right here in the Northeast. And one of the reasons that we chose North Edge was just the integrity and good people. I reference checked them, and we had numerous options, and we ultimately got it down to North Edge and one other partner, and I just felt they were the right fit culturally, and they were just good people. And it wasn't necessarily about the amount of money they were offering versus anyone else, because when you're dealing with bigger numbers, it's also like you have to work with these people day in, day out. And 6 months in, or it's actually 7 months in now, it's been a fantastic relationship. And I know North Edge will be looking to expand their presence in the Northeast. They've got a very strong presence in the Midlands and Yorkshire and Northwest, and they've made some significant investments right here in the Northeast. And it's great to see a private equity company investing in regions, because it's a very London-centric world. And certainly for us, and it's something I'd encourage other entrepreneurs, is it's an alternative option to exit in the traditional sense, which often comes with a lot of shackles, I would say, or it comes with a lot of you might sell to a competitor and have to do a 5-year earn out working for your competitor, which sounds like the worst thing in the world. So I think for me, it was the right combination of maximizing the value of the business, but getting de-risking from a personal perspective, but also having a partner that's where we got to. Like, I've been able to help us get to where we got to, but I'm not convinced I can where we want to go. I'm the right guy to always get there. So having other people around the board table to guide us is actually invaluable, and that's been a great learning and process.
You've touched on something really important there. What got you here won't get you there.
That's exactly it.
You have to always take on new ideas, new help, new people, new partners. Raman, just to try and bring this to an end, then I could chat all day. But our listeners have always got other stuff that they want to get on and do. We like to try and end with just, it's quite corny, but we like to end with, what do you think is the one thing people are just getting wrong? And you can talk about whether people are getting wrong when they're starting a business, when they're going into a deal, when they're employing teams. What's marketing per se? What do you think is the one thing that you just keep saying and go, why are they still doing that?
It's not a marketing one, actually. It's slightly different, and the book, The Floundering Founder, that I've written is split into two. And the first half is all about the business bit. Probably what we've talked about today. It's all this type of stuff. But the second half is actually all around investing in yourself and not forgetting to invest as you as an individual. And if you think of most of us who are probably listening to the podcast, go to school, go to college, go to university, get a job, and then we go down this path, right? And when we're on this path, life starts to take over, because you might get engaged, you might get married, you might have kids, all that kind of stuff. But life gets busier and busier and busier. And aside from like training at work, when was the last time you really invested in yourself? And so one thing I found in my own personal journey is, as I've invested, as the business has notched up a level, right? As we've gone from a startup to 2 people, to 10 people, to 20 people, I've had to go on that journey as well. And so the learning I would certainly say to all of your listeners are if you allow it to, your business, your career will consume the heck out of you. Your life will consume the heck out of you. So you have to make time to invest in yourself. And that could be reading a book for 10 minutes a day. It could be listening to a podcast a day. It could be reading 1 or 2 blogs a day. It could be watching a video on YouTube. Like, the amount of time we burn on social media, checking Sky News, seeing what the share price is, see what the betting odds are. Honestly, it is ridiculous how much time we waste. And then people complain because they haven't got time. I think it's all BS. I think everyone's got more than enough time. You've just got to make time for the stuff that's important. So my message, if I look at the success that I've been fortunate enough to have in the last 10 years, there was a pivot point. When I pivoted the business, I also invested in myself, and then, right, I'm going to make time to learn every day. I'm going to reflect. I'm going to constantly improve myself, like I was an entity. And I have to say that's been one of the best investments I've ever made, which is just investing in myself. And it sounds quite selfish to an extent, but I can tell you now that as a consequence, the people around me, my family, my friends, my colleagues, my business, have all benefited from that. So that would be the one lesson I would say, if any of your listeners take away from today, as well as the business stuff. It's like, don't let your career or your business consume the hell out of you. Like make, don't find, this tiny distinction, don't try and find the time. You'll never find the time. Make the time.
Yeah. Because there's a lot of people who, we see a lot of clients and they say, it's just not working. Then, okay. And then we go, so what have you been up to then? It's like, I've just binge watched Game of Thrones entirely over the last 2 weekends. It's like, well, you could have used that time to do anything else. So you've got to have fun.
Totally.
Well, you can have fun, but you can't also complain that you're not getting anywhere. You can't have it both. You can either.
Or, in Martin, the thing I tell my kids every day is do the hard stuff first, then you can do the fun stuff afterwards. It's, you have to set the example. I think a lot of us fall into that trap of, right, we're going to go home and just binge watch Netflix or whatever. It's funny because me and my wife, we have a TV in our house and we barely ever use it. And my brother-in-law is a real gadget addict, and he was like, can't believe you haven't got a bigger TV. And I was like, we'll watch it at the minute because the football's on, and we never watch TV. We will watch an episode, if that. And once, after 9 o'clock at night before we go to bed, if half an episode. And I think, some people will go home and watch 10 episodes, and each to their own, right? That's not for me to preach or anything like that. But to your point, you can't then complain that you're not getting anywhere. You've got to, back to your luck thing before, you've got to put in the effort, got to put in the hours, you've got to put in the graft, and you've got to make hard choices. And I think, if I'm honest, I think most people take the easy option and the easy road. That's why I've got a lot of respect for other entrepreneurs, because I think entrepreneurship and starting your own business and growing your own business is it's a journey where you have to take all the long road, you can't take any shortcuts. You've got to take the long, horrible paths on all of them, which is a right pain. So
it's not a popular opinion though, is it, Raman? There's a lot of people getting stick. I can't remember who it was, but there was some Instagrammer or social media influencers so were like, it's your fault you haven't got any. It's not a popular opinion, but it's a great thing for people who are happy to do the work, because it's actually easier than you think. The competition aren't putting in the work.
Totally.
It's much easier to be better than average. You haven't got to be that great to be better than average. So that's probably a good place to pack in. Listen, Raman, it's been absolutely fantastic. So your book, Floundering Founder, I presume you can get it anywhere. It's on Amazon, you've already mentioned, but also all local bookshops, etc.
Yeah, always love to hear. Anyone can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find, and obviously have a look at the book. If you go to my website, ramansehgal.com, you can actually get the first few chapters for free. All the proceeds for the book actually go to a first school in Newcastle called Leamington First School. It's where I went to school. So it goes to actually buy books in the school. There's kind of some kind of cycle where it's awesome. Not something that is awesome. And it's amazing, I'm actually funny. I'm going to the school, and I've not been into that school since I left when I was 10 or 9, many years ago. And I'm going in on Friday this week to talk to some of the kids and talk through my journey. I've been invited by the head teacher, and it's just that kind of the older you get, you kind of recognize the opportunities and the people that gave you were there at times of your life. And so I don't need the money, quite honestly, and it seems like there's a better home for it. So certainly encourage people to look at the book, get the free chapters, and if you like them, buy the book, and it goes to a good cause.
To hell with getting the free chapters. But buy the book, get some more books for kids in schools. You can't argue with that. That's not a pitch. That's not even a pitch, is it?
No,
that's why
right.
would you not want to help? Why would you not want to help some kids?
Get on Amazon and buy the book today.
Never mind the free one. Just get straight on it. We'll put the link in below. You just go there straight away. Listen, man, that has been fantastic. I hope it goes well when you visit the school, and and show some, some local kids that you can get somewhere. You don't have to repeat what the people before you did. You don't have to. And I think that's a great thing for kids, especially in our area. Probably went to school 10 miles from me in Gateshead, but it's the same. There's so many people now just doing exactly what their parents did, which is exactly what their grandparents did. You don't have to.
Exactly.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Cheers, Mark.
Really appreciate it.